Well, in January of 2020, just before the pandemic bore its full weight upon the world, I was lucky enough to go on a 2-week trip through the seminary to Iceland and Norway, where we explored much of how the church in Iceland and Norway operate and how they are different from how we structure church here in the U.S. And there's a particular holy moment that sticks out in my mind when I think back to and remember that trip. It occurred at Skaholt Cathedral, a retreat center and church pretty much in the middle of nowhere in the countryside of southwestern Iceland. And in January in Iceland, there are only about 4 hours of true sunlight from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., so much of our day was spent in darkness. And as it commonly was in Iceland, pretty much all times of the year, but especially in January, it also happened to be a very drizzly, windy, snowy day. So we made our way from the retreat center over to the church building for evening worship in the darkness, following the illuminated path and the soft, warm lighting that was a part of the exterior of the church. And when we got inside, as you would hope, it was warm, inviting us to take off our jackets and scarves and to stay a while. It was well lit, but not necessarily in like a hospital operating room well lit kind of way. It was a soft lighting, from well-placed lights throughout to the candles that were adorning the space. And when we walked into the sanctuary, it just had wonderful sound to it. The acoustics were clear, and you could hear everything. And we worshiped, just our little group, in a mysterious and reverent way with many times of silence. And when we were done, and we were leaving the sanctuary and the church for the retreat center, I remember thinking to myself, that was a holy moment. Something holy occurred here. And to this day, I do not disagree with that statement when remembering this worship. Something holy did occur that day in that church. But I also had the question pop into my head. Were we worshiping the aesthetic, the place, the atmosphere, or the divine? Which was our, or my, priority in that worship, and whom was I worshiping? And you extend that to all of us, the various places that we've worshiped or engaged with the divine in some form, and the same question can be asked: are we worshiping the tradition, the place, the setup, the culture, or God? Now, do not hear me incorrectly. Tradition and attention to detail and to place and setup of a worship space are all important pieces of worship and can be practices that invoke worship of God. But so too can they easily become the thing in which we worship, instead of the means by which we worship God, the divine. This is the reality that we are confronted with in this gospel today, a reality that the Pharisees in the gospel text are confronted with. Now, to understand where the Pharisees are coming from, let's look at that first reading again real quick. There, Moses is the mediator between God and the people of Israel. And at this point, not quite yet, they have not yet received the 10 Commandments. But God is saying here, keep these commandments that I am going to charge to you. Do not add or take anything away from them. Observe them diligently, for then that is how others will know that you are my people. And this passage initially seems straightforward. Follow this, do this, and then people will think and see this. But deeper than that, there is tremendous mystery and intimacy and relationship in this passage. Mystery, in that God does not fully explain God's self as to why these specific commandments are the right ones or why they will produce good fruit, but simply says to the people, follow them. Then relationship, in that God is giving land to the people of Israel, is entering into relationship with them and alongside them, establishing a relationship that will go on for countless generations. And then intimacy, in that if the people of Israel follow these commandments, others will ask, what other great nation has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is whenever we call him? God is so intimately near God's people that that intimacy would shine upon other people, making them wonder how it is that the people of Israel have a God so close to them. There is tremendous depth to this passage and relational exchange between God and God's people, and it is that tremendous depth that the Pharisees have done away with by the time of the gospel text. They've reduced the depth of this text, the depth of relationship between God and God's people, to a string of tight, rigid rules that humans can hold over one another. So much so that Jesus calls them out, saying again, "This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition." They have lost the mystery, the intimacy, and the relationship. They've begun worshiping the commandment and the tradition over the one who commanded in the first place. And we are not observing the Pharisees from afar in this text, wondering where did they go wrong? We are them, being confronted with the same critique from Jesus and wondering, where have we worshiped the commandment or the tradition over the one who created? I would invite you to ponder that for the rest of today and this week. And while I was pondering this myself, two examples popped into my mind. The first is a more personal one, and it is this dang collar that I'm wearing. Now, Pastor Joe has heard this gripe of mine. I cannot stand the thing. It just is not me. I don't feel like myself fully when I'm wearing it. Now, historically, the first use of the collar came about in the 6th century or so and was primarily for the identification of the priest to others around them and to be a reminder to that priest of their service to God. Well, I can understand those reasons. Joe and I think wear it on Sundays to be an easy identifier of who the pastor is, and for funerals, we wear it for that same reason. But so often I've placed the expectation on myself, or had the expectation placed on me, that it is the traditional right thing to wear for church work, that it is a must to wear the collar. And that simply is not true. There is no biblical basis for this. It is a human tradition created for structure and clarity. But when it becomes essential to worship, or essential to our understanding of the divine, I think we've gone too far. We, myself, and the universal church begin to worship the thing, the tradition, over God. And the second reason, the same could be said, I think, of our music. I'm sure, as you know, the contemporary versus traditional debate has been raging for a while now, and both sides claim rightness. It's funny how we can reduce the beauty and the mystery of music and the vast array of musical expression and genre to a right and wrong. Music is a means of worship. It is not to be worshiped. Thus, there is no right or wrong when it comes to music if it is a means of worshiping the Creator. So do you reverently sing along with an organ? Splendid. Let that musical expression guide you to the Lord. Do you passionately sing along with a full band? Awesome. Let that musical expression guide you to the one whom we worship. But let none of us worship the music itself. That is Jesus' critique here in Mark for us and for the Pharisees. That we get so wrapped up in what is beyond us, what is external, and then we try to hold each other to these external rules and traditions that we create. Jesus names the reality counter to that in verse 15. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. Now, he isn't here, I don't believe, saying that human beings are trash and only bad things come out of humanity. But when we plunge into ourselves, worshiping that which we create, well, then problems arise. Fornication, theft, murder, adultery, etc. But that isn't necessarily the given posture of humanity either. A gentleman named Father Greg Boyle said recently in a podcast called Soul Boom that I was listening to, says, humans are unshakably good. No exceptions. It is a matter of whether we live into that reality or not. It seems that Father Greg Boyle is starting to unpack what Jesus seems to be saying here in Mark. Your hearts are not turned toward me, toward reality, toward the divine. You worship human tradition and precept as if it is the divine. And when that happens, problems occur. But also see in this text, there is no eternal condemnation here. Jesus seems to be inviting us to abandon our worship of human tradition and precept and step into the freedom of the mystery and intimacy and relationship that God created us to be in with God in the first place. So whether it be the worship aesthetic or atmosphere or church clothing or the music selection and worship or any other way that you can think of where God can be or has been substituted for human tradition, Jesus here is critiquing that. Yes. But so too does Jesus invite us back to mystery and worship of the divine. Through human tradition, certainly, but also through the unshakable goodness of each and every human, and the love that radiates from within us for God and for one another. Amen.